justice and reconciliation. And we hear a lot about justice today in our country, in our culture, but we hear, I think, very little about truth. And its importance as well. And I think we hear even less about reconciliation. I think we live in a time where people are so concerned with justice for themselves or a particular group that they would rather fight than reconcile with one another. I think that we live in a culture that is hostile to the church, hostile to God, hostile to the Scriptures. And they don't want to have anything to do with really forgiving and making things right. Because I want mine and I want it now. This is what I deserve. This is what I want. This is what has happened to me. And so I want justice for this cause and for me. And I personally believe that this is so, it's this way because our true nature shows through. And that true nature is one of selfishness. Again, I think it goes something like this. I want what I believe I deserve, even if it costs others everything. We live in a time where we don't care what it costs other people. We don't care if it hurts other people. We say we do, but when we look at our news and we read the things that we read about and we see what's taking place, yes, we say we care as long as it doesn't affect me. Because then that's when the rubber starts to hit the road, and that's what comes out. I want what I want, and I want it now. In our sermon series through the book of Exodus, we've addressed many areas like this and many issues like this, and how that the Jewish people, what they experienced in their slavery in Egypt for 430 years, and now what they have begun to experience in their journey in the land between, heading out of Egypt, heading towards the promised land. And it's in these last few chapters that we've been in, since about chapter 19, that we really begin to see some of the specifics of how God wanted the people to treat one another, what He has commanded. And so in chapter 20 we have the Ten Commandments, and then from the Ten Commandments we have this kind of funneling out, if you will. We have these laws, these commands, these statutes that are given, how we are to treat one another, or how the Israelites were to treat one another, I should say. And so especially in chapters 22 and now the first part of 23, what we see is this judicial system that God has established for the Israelites. And again, these are specific laws based on the Ten Commandments. And the laws today, the things that we see, really deal with the ninth commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness, or thou shalt not lie. And so, again, these laws are to govern how the people were to treat their brothers and sisters. How they were to treat sojourners. How they were to treat others that were outside of their tribes but have chosen to live among them and travel with them. Again, these are the laws given to the people of Israel for the benefit of all and for the glory of God. These laws are to demonstrate to the lost people groups that would be surrounding them, that they're to serve as a testimony, if you will, of how a people who follow the one true God were to live. And we can benefit from that. I hope that we have thus far. And so again, this serves as a testimony to the lost. And there's at least several lessons here for us as followers of Christ. Again, even though the book of Exodus isn't about us, it wasn't written to us, but again, it is for us, remember. And so as followers of Christ, it should remind us of the gospel. The gospel that Dr. Piper spoke about earlier. The gospel of Christ calls us to do the same thing that the laws did for Israel. It calls us to be different. It calls us to stand out from the world around us, to live differently. And our lives, again, as Christians, are to serve as a testimony to the lost, with the hope that our witness will create a thirst among the lost. I'm sure I've told you this story. I don't know if it's true or not. I think that it is, from what I've read. But D.L. Moody, great preacher at one time, was at this conference preaching, and a young man came up to him and said, talking about evangelism, he said to D.L. Moody, well, Reverend Moody, we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make him drink. You know that old saying? And I love what D.L. Moody said in response. He said, it's not our duty to make them drink. It's our duty to make them thirsty. And I think that's true. That was true for the Israelites and the people that lived around them. And it's true for Christians today. That the way we live, our manner of life, the things that we do, the things that we say, what we believe, how we live differently, should cause a sense of thirst among the lost. So I have several questions for you this morning as we begin. Number one, does truth matter to me? When you ask yourselves, does truth matter to me? Does the truth of God and His Word matter to me? Does the truth about the fallen nature of our world and the condition of our neighbors matter to me? Does it matter to you? I think we also need to ask, do I care more about justice for me rather than promoting grace and justice for others? And then lastly, does my conversation, does my speech, does my manner of living, and in the King James Version translation, the word conversation, that's typically what it means. It means manner of life. But does my conversation bring healing and reconciliation? Those are the questions I would like for us to consider this morning as we move through this passage. And I will try to move efficiently. Number one, to be true and just, as God is true and just, requires a special set of lenses for us believers, or as believers. Here's what I mean by that. Sometimes when I'm counseling someone who has been deeply hurt by another, I ask them if they will try to put on their Jesus glasses. And sometimes they look at me and give me this strange look, and I can almost sense what they're about to say. What Jesus glasses? What do you mean by that? Here's what Jesus glasses are. Here's what I mean. I'll say something to the effect that, let me just say, again, before I tell you this, what I'm asking I know is difficult. It's difficult for me. But what I mean by this, and when I ask someone to put on their Jesus glasses, I'm asking them to try and not look at the person who hurt them through their pain. Try to look at the person that hurt you, not through your pain. That's difficult. Try not to look at that person with your biases, and we all have biases, don't we? Let's try to look at that other person as Jesus does, either as a sinner saved by his grace on the cross, or as a sinner in need of his grace. See, when we begin to start to look at other people the way Jesus looked at us, they look different. If we just look at other people the way we perceive them to be, rich or poor, black or white, mean or nice, then what we do is we bring our biases in, and we don't really begin to look at them in a realistic way. Think about this. When Jesus looks at us, those who have trusted him, when God the Father looks at us, what does he see? Does he see us as we were? Does he see us as the things are presently? Or does he see us through the blood, the prism of Christ? He sees us as we will finally be. We need to look at people sometimes as they are, people who are desperate and in need of love and understanding. Then sometimes we need to ask ourselves, what is the reason behind their actions? Is it that they're just evil, sinful people? Or is it some other reason? Again, I'm not suggesting that we give them a pass or that we try to justify some sin or some hurt that they've caused. I'm just saying, can we look at them a little differently in order that we can begin to move beyond the pain and the hurt that we've experienced? But look at this. The verses that were read, Exodus 23, 1 through 3. You shall not spread a false report, a lie. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many, so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. And then verse 6 kind of goes with this. You shall not pervert the justice to your poor in his lawsuit. Here's the context. The commands really, again, are an extension of the 9th commandment, thou shalt not lie. And the thought is that these commands are given in these verses because there's an issue or problem taking place among the people. And that kind of makes sense. That as they live together, as they move and do all these things in life together, there are going to be problems. And there's going to be disagreements, correct? I mean, you just can't live life without having some issues with other people sometimes. But it's believed that these were some of the problems that were taking place, and people were lying and bringing false allegations against others for some sort of gain, or for some sort of revenge, if you will. Sometimes they brought it just because they didn't like the person. They looked down on the poor, or the poor looked down on the rich, having these different thoughts that neither were good, that the rich were evil, that the poor were dirty, that they were undeserving, or the rich got something because they had cheated their way somehow. Kind of the same today, isn't it? And so he's telling us he's telling the Israelites not to show favor to those who are poor or are rich or more respected, have a more respected place in society. But look at that passage again. Look at verse 1. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness in order to go to court to gain something that doesn't belong to you, or to cause some trouble for another. It's interesting, the word wicked here, or evil as it's translated in some, means guilty. A guilty man. So read it that way. Look at it again. You shall not join hands with a guilty man. And here's what he's saying. Don't join yourself to another who is in the wrong. Don't join yourself to someone who is asking you to lie or to give false witness or to do something against another that you know is not right. Don't join yourself with those who are in the wrong. Because when you do, it makes you wrong as well. Then look at verse 2. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit. I like what one commentator says. He said, if we were to render this in the strictest form, it would mean, thou shalt not follow the many to evil. I like that. Don't follow the wicked to evil. You're following an evil, a wicked path, a guilty path. When I read that the first time, several weeks ago, actually several months ago, I kind of had this thought pop through my head. And then I went back and thought about it some more. And I thought, that's mob mentality in a sense. That's how some people are. That's how they are in nature. They tend to fall in with the loudest crowd. They tend to fall in with the most charismatic person. They tend to believe that the one speaking the loudest is the one who has the most authority. And they just kind of follow along without giving much thought to it. Then I thought, you know what, I've seen that in Scripture before. If you have your Bibles, turn over to Mark 15 for just a moment. Mark 15. We're coming up on this time of season where this verse really applies. But Mark 15, verse 6. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. He's talking about Pilate. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priest had delivered him up. But the chief priest, notice, stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews? And they cried out again. What, church?
Crucify.
They cried out what?
Crucify.
Crucify. And Pilate said to them, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify. The crowd joined with the evil, the wicked, seeking the death of the innocent. Look at verses 3 and 6 again on the screen. nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. You shall not prevent the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. We are to, church, we are to look beyond the clothes of a person. We're to look beyond the car, the home, the bank account of a person. Actually, it would be nice if we didn't see those things at all, wouldn't it? See, we are to treat all equally, whether rich or poor, whether they're black or white, or from this country or another country. Justice and truth are partners. You cannot have justice apart from truth. But just as justice and truth are partners, they are balanced by grace and mercy. I don't know if you've ever been before a judge in any courtroom situation, but if you have, I'm sure if you were guilty, you were hoping for a little grace and a little mercy, weren't you? Truth and justice balanced by grace and mercy. Here's number 2. Despite our feelings or how others may feel about us, believers have a responsibility to do right. Just do right. I like that statement by Martin Luther King Jr. The time is always right to do what is right. Here's another confession for me. It's difficult for me sometimes to always have the right attitude towards those or to help those who have hurt me in the past when they need it. I think that's human. I think if we're honest with ourselves, probably most of us feel that way. Especially if they show no remorse whatsoever, no contrition. If they think they've done nothing wrong and they show no care about what pain they may have caused, it's hard to have a helpful attitude when they're in need. But Christianity isn't easy, is it? God doesn't call us to do what is easy. He calls us to do what is right according to His will. But look at these verses 4 and 5. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. I don't know about you guys, but any of you still use ox and donkeys? No, me either. But the principle is what we're looking at here. And here's what he's saying. The context is this. Of the word enemy and the word hate, it's most likely speaking of someone who is a legal adversary, someone who has brought some charge against you or some lawsuit against you. And it's easy for us when someone attacks us in that way, and maybe unjustly, that we kind of get riled up a little bit. And we don't want to be very helpful to them. Sometimes the attitude comes out that when something happens to this person or something happens to something that belongs to them, and we kind of think to ourselves, they kind of deserve it. They're getting what they deserve. Now, I'm sure none of you ever think that way, right? It's easy for us to help those who are friends, those who are considerate of us, those who seem to love us. And it's hard to help those who we believe are our enemies. But isn't that what God has called us to do? Again, He hasn't called us to do what is easy, what is natural, what is fleshly. He has called us to do something different, to be different. Even for the Israelites, when they saw an animal that was burdened down and needed help, that had, in a sense, fallen under a great weight, they were responsible to help. Why is that, you guess? Look at this passage. Luke 6:27 through 30. We saw part of this a week or so ago. Jesus says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back." Now, he's speaking, of course, in reference to the gospel. If you're being mistreated because of the gospel, especially go the extra mile. But isn't that the culture we live in? Isn't that what we see in our community oftentimes? That people will turn their noses to us if you're a Christian. Or they have this view of the church that everyone in the church is a hypocrite and they're all evil and they just want your money and they want to mislead you and they want to hurt you and they want to abuse you somehow. That's not you, is it? I don't think so. I think you're a very loving people. Most Christians that I know are very loving people. God calls us to be different for the advancement of the gospel. It's for His glory. This life is temporary. And the principle that we find here is that what is behind such behaviors is God. It is God-like. We're called to do the right thing in order that it might provide us an opportunity to share the gospel with someone else. That they might actually not only see the gospel in action, but they might give us an opportunity to share the gospel verbally. Your actions and your words, my actions, my words, may actually make an eternal difference in the life of an enemy. Of someone who hurt us. And in that sense, then we are turning that person from an enemy to a brother or sister. Now, truthfully, we're called to more. We are called to be ministers of reconciliation. Here's another very familiar passage to you, I'm sure. 2 Corinthians 5:18 and following. Paul writes, "All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to Himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to Himself, not counting their trespasses against them, their sins, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation." Now, I want you to see something. God has entrusted to you, the believer, something that can change someone for all eternity. He has given to you, entrusted to you, something of great care and of great value in the gospel of Jesus Christ, entrusting to your care this ministry of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. God making His appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, He made Him, Jesus, to be sin who knew no sin, so that in Him, Jesus, he might become the righteousness of God. So what is this reconciliation? It's the restoration of friendly relationships. Think about it. Your relationship, my relationship with God, was broken through our federal head Adam. We are at an enmity with God. We are his enemy until we surrender to his call, understanding that Jesus is the Savior that we need. There's this breakdown in relationships, and God is calling us to be his ambassadors of reconciliation to a lost and dying world. And that includes those who do not like us and those that we may not like either. Leads us to our last point. Number 3. Not a very nice picture, is it? God is emphatic that justice not be perverted in order to protect the innocent. And sometimes this means the guilty walks, but not forever. Again, from the standpoint of wanting justice in this life, I sometimes find it difficult to think of a guilty person who has caused so much pain in my life or someone else's life, just seemingly being unscathed and able to walk away without any form of punishment. But no one really does just walk away. I want you to see this verse, and then I want to share something that I've shared with you before, but I want to remind you of it. Exodus 23:7-8. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked, the guilty. And you shall not take a bribe, or you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. And the thought is this, that there were those who would get on the witness stand and lie for a bribe, causing an innocent person to be put to death. That still happens sometimes. But here's the thought that I struggle with. When we see murderers and rapists and abusers, child molesters and others, some of the worst criminals or crimes that we can think of, seemingly having lesser punishment or walking away totally free, it should bother us. Sin should disturb us, all sin. But these sins against the most innocent should really stir us. But here's where the disturbance comes. To think that that person who has done such an awful deed may at some point, right before their death, surrender their life to Christ and be covered by his grace, by the blood of the cross, and then step into eternity and be welcomed by God. Amen. We struggle with that. But justice has been done. You may say, how? Because Christ took his guilt on the sin, on the cross, just like he did ours. There was a payment, and Christ made it. And that's what troubles us sometimes, when we really think about it. Look at this last passage and we'll close. Paul writes, "Beloved Christians, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." Here's the deal. All sin is judged. It's either judged when a lost person steps out of this life into eternity, or for people like us who know Christ, it was judged on the cross 2,000 years ago. How God brings about justice isn't our concern. Knowing that He brings it should be good enough. And that's the struggle that we have sometimes. So I say to you, if you're like me and you struggle with some of those things, have you put your Jesus glasses on recently? Justice will prevail. All sin will be dealt with again, either in the judgment of hell or on the cross. And my challenge to you this week is this. If you have grudges, will you take them? If you have anger, will you take it to God once again? And maybe you've tried it before and you're still carrying grudges and bitterness and anger, and you've taken it to the cross and it just doesn't seem to go away. But will you try it one more time? Will you continue to try it until you're relieved of it or you go home? If it takes every day for the rest of your life, putting on your Jesus glasses and taking your grudges, your bitterness, and your anger to the cross, then do it. Because you are the one who will be blessed by it. Carrying those things comes with a heavy, or at a heavy price, a heavy cost. Keep taking it to Him. Day after day after day, if need be. Let's pray together. Hi, I want to thank you for watching this sermon video, and I hope it's been a blessing to you. Again, I also want to encourage you to put those Jesus glasses on. Some of us have been hurt deeply in our lives, and it's hard to look beyond the pain and the anger, the bitterness, the wrath, and those things come naturally for us. But looking at others as Jesus does not. And if we have to bow every day and bring the same petitions before God, He hears us. He'll help us. And He understands the struggles that we have as human beings. If I can be of any help to you, please feel free to contact me by email. I also want to encourage you to visit a new website, a helping ministry called Christ Center Solutions, and it is a biblical counseling ministry, a coaching ministry that I founded last year, and I want it to be a blessing to you as well. And so again, please visit that site if you can, or if you would like to talk. There's a way to do that. Set appointments. We can talk online, and I would encourage you to give us a visit. Thanks a lot, and God bless.